Good morning and welcome to my humble channel again. And I have two games to show us today. And these two games were actually played at the Budapest Olympiad in the first round. The first game is between the country Georgia and United Arab Emirates. And this is in the female section. That's the first game we're going to go through. And then the second game is going to be between Netherlands versus Lebanon, which is in the male section. Very interesting games. And the reason why I'm actually going through this game is because of the possibility of each of the lower rated players who was able to get a draw, but somehow they lost the thread of the game and they lost the game. Why did they lose the game? We are about to find out. So let us get right into it. So the first game was played between Maamari Wafia from United Arab Emirates with a rating of 1908 against Grandmaster Batsiashvili Nino from Georgia. She's a 24-61. So let us see how this game went. Knight f3, d5, b3. These are like flank openings. Anytime you fianchetto your bishop, those are flank openings. Sometimes even when you move your knight to f3 first, that's still a flank opening. Depending on if you're going to control the central squares or just keep playing on the flank. So b3 is played. Of course, the idea of b3 is to put the bishop on b2 to have a long pressure on the long diagonal. Excuse me. d5, e3, knight to f6, bishop goes to b2, keeping an eye on the e5 square. Very important for white. White has the bishop on e5, the knight on f3 also on e5. That's it. That's something black has worried about. So e6 is played, c4. And what's the point of c4? Of course, it would be nice to move the knight to c3, but you don't want to move the knight to c3 with the pawn on c2. Because of the pawn on c2 actually blocks the queen from getting into the game. So c4 is a good move. And also by moving the pawn to c4, you're trying to hit on the black central squares, the black pawns in the center. So knight c6 is played, it captures on d5, captures back, d4. So white is pretty much trying to create an opening for the bishop. Now, both bishops can get in the game, either through b5 or through this long diagonal. So, and yes, after the move d4, bishop to g4 is played, pinning the knight to the queen. It's very important to break the pin immediately, especially with the knight being one of the pieces defending the d4 square. So bishop e2 is played, pin is broken, bishop takes f3, bishop takes back, takes on d4, bishop takes d4, knight takes, queen takes, check. Now in this position, white played the best move, which is king e2. King e2 is the best move here. You don't want to move your knight to c3, to d2, because bishop b4 is very strong, followed by knight d5, and you're going to be in trouble. So king e2 makes a lot of sense. King e2 is played. Rook to c8. Of course, rook c1 is coming into the game. Very important you move your rook to d1 so that the king can simply hide. And after the move rook d1, bishop to e7. Of course, the idea of bishop e7 is for black to castle and then keep the king safe. a3, castles, b4. A move white should play, really. I think a better move would have been to move the rook to c2 and then just tuck your king in. What's the point of rook to c2? You defended the second rank. The other rook defends the first rank. And you already have a target on d5. You have the bishop, the queen, and the rook on d5. It's not like about taking it right away. Even though you can take it, but before you try to grab such a pawn, you want to make sure your king is well hidden, where there are no threats on your king. So looking at this position structurally, I think white has a slight edge just because of the isolated pawn on d5. So in this position, b4 was played, and after the move b4, sorry, excuse me. After the move b4, queen to a4. Black actually had a better move in the move rook to c2 check, forcing the knight to move to d2. Or yeah, knight to d2, or probably maybe king f1 and then. So, but instead queen to a4 was played, knight d2, developing the last piece. It's very important for white. Like I said, if white can get away with the king tucked in and the knight on a good square, black is going to suffer because of the pawn on d5. Because one black loses this pawn, he's down a pawn, and he's going to have difficulties with the position. So, rook to e8 is played. Interesting move. Rook puts pressure on the king on e1 in e2. It's very important we do something about that. Anytime there's an x-ray attack, always treat it like a direct attack. You don't have to wait till the fine is totally open before you start thinking about talking in your king. So after the move rook to e8, queen to d3. And now that's a good move because I like queen d3. I don't know if it's the best move, but I like queen to d3. Why do I like queen to d3? Now, with your queen on d4, right? Your queen is on a dark square. Your rook is on a dark square. Your opponent has a bishop on the dark square. That's a red flag. What do I mean by that? If somehow the bishop gets to f6, you're going to have to worry about this too. So this is one of the things I talk about in positions like this. You don't want your pieces to be on the same square with your opponent's bishop. He has a dark square bishop. Try to put your pieces on the light squares. He has a light square bishop. Try to put your pieces on the dark squares. So queen d3 makes a lot of sense. Queen to d3, rook to c2, good move. Pinning the knight to the king. Anytime you're in the pin, break the pin. Anytime you're in the pin, break the pin. I probably would have tucked my king in. Or maybe attack the rook. Either rook c1 or king f1. So let's see what white played. White played rook to c1. Okay, attacks the rook immediately. It protects, it captures back. Bishop d5. Now white wins a pawn. d5. Now I'm going to say this again. White is from United Arab Emirates. Her name is Maamari. She's a woman FIDE master, rated 1908. She's playing against a lady from Georgia with a rating of 2461. She's a grandmaster, not a woman grandmaster, a grandmaster. And at this point, white has a very slight edge. Even if we say the position is even, it's a big deal. So what do I mean by that? That means white has been able to get away from the opening and the middle game against the GM with an equal position. So what does white need to do here? Just hold your position. Make sure there are no tricks and stuff like that. So bishop takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5, queen check, queen comes to d3, queen goes to c6, hitting the pawn on on g2, sorry. King protects the pawn. g6. Now, looking at this position, it is there is no way white should lose this game. No way at all. Why? Because every target black can hit on, white can easily defend those targets. And what I mean targets, it could be weak pawns like the pawn on g2. It could be like the knight on d2. Whatever it is that is a weakness for white, it can easily be defended. So at this point, it's very important for white to really know exactly what she is playing for. It's very important you know what you're playing for. Are you trying to win a game or you're trying to draw a game? It's very important because if you know what you're playing for, you want to stick to it. Because the moment you just keep playing without really having an idea of what exactly you're trying to get from that game, you're going to get in trouble. You're going to lose the thread of the game. And I think that's what happened in this game and the other game I'm going to show us. So in this position, king f1 was played, knight to e4. And that's a nice move. Defending the c3 square and keeping an eye on the d6 square, the f6 square, the c5 square. So especially stopping the rook from going to the c3 square. So rook goes to c4, attacking the knight. The knight steps to g3. Bishop goes to f6, attacking the rook on a1. Rook to d1. Rook attacks the queen. Queen goes for a queen exchange, captures back. Rook takes a3. Now, it's still a slight edge, or let's not even say it's even. I'm going to say this again. You have to know what you're playing for, because if you don't, you're going to lose the thread of the game, and especially when you're playing a higher rated player, you might just lose the thread and lose the game just because you don't know exactly what you're supposed to play for. So, knight to e4 is played. Of course, a good move, activating the knight, making sure you want to put the knight some good squares. Bishop goes to e7. Okay, at this point, I like rook d7. And what's the point? You know, if it takes the pawn, I take back. I have pressure on the pawn on a7. I can move my knight to g5, put a pressure on f7. And that way, I can first stop this king from trying to get in the game. With my rook on the 7th rank, and I can easily go behind the pawn to stop the pawn. So, b5 is played. b5 also not a bad move. You know, now b5 is threatening rook here, actually, trying to win the pawn, putting double pressure, double attack on the pawn and the bishop. So b6 is played. Now rook d7, king to f8. Now, at this point, the game is just totally even. Why the engine is always giving a very slight edge. I don't know, but totally even. And I'm going to remind us, this is a 1900 against the 2461. So, king e2, of course, king e2 is very important. Anytime you get into a position where you have less pieces on the board, which is what we call the endgame, you want your king to come into the middle of the board as quick as possible, because the positioning of your king in an endgame position determines a lot. So king e2 makes a lot of sense. H6, g4. I'm not so sure about that move, g4. I'll probably maybe g3 and h4, maybe. I'm just thinking. But I don't know, g4, because with g4, I mean, then the pawn on f2 is going to have to be defended by the knight and the king. And it can be attacked by the rook and the bishop after g4. But with the pawn on g3, it's going to be difficult for this bishop to attack this pawn on f2. So let's keep going. g4 is played. Rook attacks the pawn on b5. h3. Now, a good move for white would have been just probably to move the knight to c3. Just defend the pawn. Just defend the pawn. And for example, if the bishop comes to f6 attacking the knight, knight goes to d5 attacking the bishop. Now you have to either move back, then I can easily, if you move back, I can actually move my knight to d6, putting pressure on f7. So white is looking good here. So what white is pretty much doing is you're trying to make sure that you don't lose the game. Meanwhile, you're trying to take every opportunity you have if you have to win the game. That means if black is playing too desperately. So h3 is played, rook captures back. I'm going to say this again. At this point, this game is even. I'm not necessarily saying it's a drawn position, but it is even. So that means if you have the white pieces or the black pieces, you want to make sure you do not lose this game. I'm going to say if you have the white pieces. Why? Because the white pieces is actually the person that has the lower rating. So against the high rated player, it's very important for you to sit on this position. Sit on the game. Don't let your opponent make any headways. And what do you want to do in this position? Pretty much you want to keep an eye on the B pawn, which is the pass pawn. You want to make sure this pawn is not going anywhere. And of course, you have the majority on the king's side, which really is to your advantage. So let's keep going. Rook check, king goes to f3. Now here we go. This is one of the reasons why I didn't like the g4. If the pawn was on g3, bishop h4 was not going to be possible. So knight has to come to g3, where rook attacks the pawn first. At least the knight is still defending, the king is defending. So we don't have to worry about knight g3 yet. So b5 is played, knight g3 is played, b4, knight goes back to e4. As long as white keeps this position, now there is no way this pawn is going to make any headways, because the moment the knight rook moves away attacking the pawn on f2, the knight can actually readjust itself to put double attack on this pawn and just capture the pawn, and then white is back up with pawn up. So b3 is played, knight goes back to g3, bishop captures, king captures. And again, totally drawn position, totally even. I'm not going to say draw, but totally even position. So pretty much black and white can just like sit on this position without doing much and then just make sure she has the draw in hand. But something happened, which always happens when a high-rated player plays against a lower-rated player. And what the high-rated player normally does is just keep moving the pieces, hoping the lower-rated player makes a mistake, and that happens all the time. Now, it's kind of tough for the lower-rated player sometimes because playing a high-rated player, you're of course definitely intimidated. But this is why I said anytime you're playing, you have to know what you're playing for. If you know you're playing for the draw, sit on your position. Make sure there are no tricks. Now, if you try to, get adventurous, that's when things happen. And that's exactly what happened this game and why White was able to lose this game. And Black won. So let's keep going. King to E8. Now, this rook is so well placed because the king cannot join the action. It's cut off. So that's a good thing. The king is high, pretty much cut out of the game. So king to E8, king to E4, rook comes to B2, attacking the pawn on F2. F4 is played. Actually, if I had this position, I'll probably just move my king back. Why? Why am I moving my king back? I'm not trying to, I'm just going to hold the position so that there is nothing black is going to do. He plays F4, still a good move. But the reason why I'm a little skeptical about F4 is because you don't want to have this rank all opened up. Some things might just happen. We don't know. But let's keep going. King goes to F8. King, I don't necessarily like this move. I don't necessarily like that move. Now, why shouldn't we try to come and capture this pawn? Yeah, this is black's pawn that is weak. White has a weak pawn on H3. There is no way the rook can defend B3 and then attack this at the same time. So what would I have done in this position? This is actually an interesting move. King E5 is an interesting move. What's the point of King E5? You want to go to F6. Then you have this thread, you have that thread. But of course, black is not going to let you do that. Because after King E5, he's probably going to move his king to, let's say, G7. And then you can move your pawn to H4. The idea is you want to play either G5 and keep an eye on the square. Anytime the rook moves away, you're going to lose this pawn. And you're going to be left with equal number of pawns on the king side. And there is no magic that black can make to win the game. But this didn't happen. Instead, white brought the king towards the side of the board. Why? I really have no clue. Because think about it. You're trying to get my pawn here, but I can also get your pawn here. And once I get your pawn here, this is going to be weak. This is going to be weak. So what exactly are you playing for? So that's why I say you have to be careful and you have to know what you're playing for in every kind of position. So let's keep going. Rook goes to H2. Rook captures pawn. King captures. King moves to D4 so that the rook protects the pawn. But this is hanging, right? So let's attack the pawn on G4. Even though white loses this pawn, it's still not a position that white should lose with best play. But G5 is played, captures back. Rook captures, and now king to E4. Now, this is the blunder in this position. Though we're not talking about the blunder in this game, but somehow it's kind of related because white had a lot of opportunities to make sure the draw is held. Even in this position, white could have played king to D3. The idea of king to D3 is just to bring the king around. Once your king is in front of this pawn, there is no way the pawn is going to get a coin. Your pawn on E3 pretty much cancels the pawn on the F file. And then the pawn on G6 can't do much because your king is already on F2, pretty close to the pawn. And in positions like this, you want to move your rook all the way so that it can attack the king from behind. So there is no way this game is going to be lost by white. But, when you're playing and you're inexperienced, things happen. So king F5 was played. King E4, rook F5, cutting the king off. Now black just has a plan of, black has the plan of just bringing the king this way, and cutting this king off and then just coming down, rolling the pawn, and the game is going to be over. And that's exactly what happened in the game. Rook f2, pawn g5, king g6, and that's how black won this game. Yeah. King is cut off. Now, the rook pretty much cuts the king off. The rook is cut off the king pawn. So, through white's carelessness, and yeah, it's still being careless, but I would definitely say it's still being careless. But it's a process. You're not going to just win games against strong players. At least try to get a draw. Try to hold them. Don't try to be too adventurous in an even position. You're not going to outplay a strong player in an even position. You actually are even bound to make more mistakes than they do. So that was how that game ended. And the next game I'm going to show us is between Lebanon and Netherlands. El Jawich versus Giri Anishgiri. White played a beautiful, beautiful position. Beautiful opening. Just watch this. It's like it started with like some of like well, he actually later on transposed some open Sicilian. It actually almost started like a close Sicilian. You'll think white is just trying to, fear and shed, or trying to. You think white is just trying to play a close position, but somehow along the line he opened up the position. So even from looking from the flank opening a fianchetto Sicilian, the position got opened up and white has a very beautiful position. And there was absolutely nothing Grandmaster Anishgiri could do until white decided to lose the game himself. So e6, g3. g3 is very important here because the idea of the bishop to g2, putting pressure on the long diagonal. So you have the pawn on e4, you have the knight on d5, and you have the bishop on g2, keeping an eye on the d5 square. So knight f3, knight f6 is played, bishop to g2, d6. Normally in this position, d5 is played, and sometimes bishop to e7. So the super GM plays d6. I'm probably just trying to check out what white knows about this position. White plays d4 immediately. This is what I was talking about. Immediately with the move d4, it transposed to an open Sicilian. Of course, the bishop of the bishop g2 variation. So it captures back, bishop to d7, castles, and bishop to e7, takes on c6, takes back, queen to e2. White has a very nice position. Like, there's absolutely nothing white should be worried about in this position. His king is safe, his pieces are looking good, he has pressure along the d file because we have a d pawn that black has to always worry about. White has moves like rook to d1, bishop to f4, rook a to c1, and white is looking really good. And in positions like this, it's going to be really hard for black to come up with any kind of play. Now, what black might want to do is play moves like a6, b5, b4, trying to force this knight off. But of course, I'm just going to play a3. And with my pieces centralized, there's not going to be any magic that black can do. Think about this position. White is actually the one that has a slight pull, very slight though the pull is. But let's keep going. And castles, rook to d1, keeping an eye on the d file with the queen on c7, on d8, sorry. The knight goes to d7. This is a very typical maneuver in the Sicilian defense. The knight goes to d7, trying to come to either the e5 square or the c5 square, and then vacating that f6 for the bishop to put pressure on the central square. So knight d7 was played, knight to b5. It's a multi-purpose move. The idea of knight b5 is, number one, to put pressure on the pawn on d6, and number two, to vacate the c file so the pawn can get to c4. With the pawn on c4, pawn on b3, bishop on b2, rook on c1, white is really looking good. I really don't see how white should lose this game. But like I said, when you're playing a high-rated player, things happen. You could call it magic, but things happen. So bishop takes c6, queen takes c6. I think white also just achieved some more advantage in this position. What am I talking about? Now, white has the bishop here, one, and it doesn't really have any obvious weak point. Of course, the c file still belongs to black. But white has the bishop here, it's an open position. There's a target on d6. There's a target on b7. So think about this position. There is no way white should lose, you would think. But like I said, when you're playing a much higher rated player, things are not always the same. The only way you can actually start to score against them, maybe it draws or wins, if you actually get to play them on a regular basis, on a constant basis. And you're not going to get to play 2700 on a regular basis because, of course, most of them get invitation invited to big tournaments like that. But you have to start by playing stronger opponents. So in this position, I really believe White has a very slight edge. He has the bishop here and all that. So let's see how this game continues. Queen to c7, c3. You make it. Like I mentioned earlier, the only weak point White has was the c2 pawn. Not just about the c2 pawn, the c file. Because Black can also put pressure on the c file and do what? Open up the position. And what did I say again? Open up the position. But you can't be opening up the position against somebody that has the bishops. You're going to get in trouble. It doesn't matter if you're a GM or spot GM or whatever. You cannot open up the position against the bishops. You are going to get in trouble. So knight to e4, e5 was played. c4 is, there's pressure on c4. We have the two pieces, right? There's pressure on f3. You have to check all these things when the moves are made. So here bishop goes to f4. What is the threatening? Bishop takes is not so. It is a threat because bishop takes, pawn takes, rook to d7. It's pretty strong move. So queen go a6 is played. Queen goes to e2. b5. I mentioned this earlier. White is just trying to. Black should try to open up the position. But think about it. Now the knight is going to come to c4. Now with the knight on c4, game can get a little bit complicated. Of course, you can still kick the knight and play rook to c1 and play c4. We can still do that. But White decided to play bishop captures here. Now, after bishop takes on e5, the position pretty much became even. Like no advantage for White, no advantage for Black. Prior to the capture, White still had a pull. He still had the pull. And what do I mean by that? That means with moves like rook to c1, b3, c4, because if you take now, you can take with the idea of rook takes, doubling your rooks. And of course, thinking about this position, if this game goes to an endgame, with the bishop trading the knight, having opposite color bishop, there should be no way White should lose this game. No way. No way. So let's keep going. Bishop captures back, a4. I like that move, a4. White has the majority on the queen side. Pretty much trying to, if it takes, rook takes, this is under attack. And this could come here, put the pressure on a6. There's two pawns against none. And even if you get one pawn, there's still going to be another dangerous pawn. So this looks good for White. But the thing is, on Black's side of the board, on White's side of the board, most of these pawns are on the dark square. So you know what that means? There could be pressure on those dark square at some point in time. So after the move a4, b4 is played, captures back, rook to c1, queen to b6, queen to e3. That's an interesting move. I was saying something about the f2 square earlier. Of course, queen f6, rook is going to come to c8, maybe bishop to c5, putting pressure on all that. So queen e3 is an interesting move. Not a bad move. It's interesting. It's interesting in the sense that I think at this point, White says, you know what, I can just hold my position and then nothing happens, which is a good thing. And I mentioned this in the last video I did, like in the first game I went through. When you have a position against a strong player, just hold your ground. Just sit on the draw. Like you just wait. Let's see what they're going to do to win the game. So queen takes e3, captures back. Black has a slight edge, but there is no way. I'm going to say this again. There is no way Black is going to create any kind of magic as long as you can defend your weak points. What are your weak points here? a4 is weak, b2 is weak. Yes, these two pawns are weak, but your king can easily get to e2. Keeping an eye on this, you need to activate the bishop. Your bishop can find a way to come to c4, maybe b3. There is no way White should lose this position, right? Maybe not. Let's keep going. g6, bishop to f1, very good move. White is a very good move. Anytime your pawns block your bishop, that's bad. So you always want to get your bishop to a square where it is doing something. Bishop c4 will be very good, ideal square for the bishop, because then it puts pressure on this diagonal. And with the bishop on c4, you can always play b3. closing up the position totally, totally. No way for the GM, for the super GM. Bishop F1, A5, Bishop to C4, Rook to D8, King E3. Yeah, you have to defend your weaknesses. This is weak for white. This is weak. Well, this is weak. Now it's trying to defend it. This is also weak, but it's kind of hard for white, for black to get to this. It doesn't have a light square bishop. And there is no way rook can attack this. So you don't want to worry about this pawn on e4. At the end of the day, this pawn on e4 is going to be exchanged by either one of these pawns. So nothing to be worried about with the pawn on e4. Of course, the e3 pawn too, there could be pressure on the e3 pawn. But as long as you don't have two pieces putting pressure on e3, you are going to be just fine. So rook to rook a to c8, b3. Bishop attacks the rook and the pawn. Just move the rook out of the way. Now, you don't, of course, you don't want to play rook to c2 because the bishop takes check. And even though I still think it's even, just bring your king back here. It's still going to be even. But you don't want any kind of unnecessary mistake. So rook to b1. Rook goes to d6. What's the point of rook d6? Probably trying to double the d file. One thing that I like about white's position is black doesn't have any entry point. Think about it. Black doesn't have the b3 square and the d3 square, the d4 square, the d5 square. You only have the d7 and the d2. But I'm not worried about this d2 because if I can get my king to e2 and my rook to b2, then you really have to move this bishop, the bishop. And I always can exchange a pair of rooks and my rook stays on c2. There is no way you're going to get in the game, right? But let's keep going. King c2, king e2, sorry. Doubles on the d file, rook to b2. The position is totally even. Totally even. There is no way for black to make any headways. I'm going to say this again. The pawns on a4 is taking care of the b3. b3 is protecting bishop on c4 and vice versa. The pawns there, you don't want to worry about them because there is no way black can get to the pawns. The pawn on e4 cannot be attacked by either of the rooks or the bishop. The pawn on e3 is a weakness because it's attacked by the bishop and defended by the king. But the good thing about that is there is no way a second piece can come and attack this. So where in the world is black going to get his play from? Nowhere. Unless you're a 22, maybe it's 2300, it's a 2296. Unless you're a 2296 playing against a 2724, and then you freak out for whatever reasons and you decide to just blunder and lose the game, because you're not going to get a lot of chances against such strong player. So let's keep going. Bishop to b4, rook takes back, just bishop d3. Just sit on the position. Just sit on it. Like, know where black is going to make anyways. The evaluation here says even, totally 0-0-0-0 for every kind of move. So g5, of course, the GM is going to try to want to do something, right? g5, h3 is played. Personally, I wouldn't even make any h3. Well, even if it does, h3 is played. h5, but think about this. What exactly are these two pawns going to do to this? Nothing. You cannot push this because I'm just going to take, I'm going to take back, I'm going to lose a pawn, and then what? Nothing. But somehow, people find a way to lose games for whatever reasons. So, at this point, I thought, chess is not just about the theory, It's not just about being fit and all that stuff. It's also about your thought process, as in, what do you think about that game? Because if you, it's almost like his hypnotism, because somehow you force your opponent to make a bad move, you win the game, and you're like, wow, more leg on, like I'm good, So, and that's why I said, when you have a position, just sit on it. Like, let them show you how they're going to win the game without you compromising your position. King g7, rook to d1. I like that move. It's pretty much saying, you know what, I want to exchange off this rook, so I don't have to worry about the rook. He says, no, I'm not going to let you do that. Rook d8. He says, well, I want to do that. He says, I'm not going to let you do that. Now, as long as these files are closed, there is no way this rook is going to get in the game. As long as the files are closed. So if I have the black-white pieces, what would I do here? White plays king f3. I really hate that move. Why would you allow pawn push check? Right? Take, he has the file. Not that it does really give him anything, but when you start putting yourself in such situations, you're going to get in trouble. Number one, the rooks need open files to operate. Without an open file, this rook is totally useless. I actually like the move rook to d7 instead of king f3. I like the move rook to d7. And you have a threat. The threat is bishop takes e6. So probably the king moves. Then just you can just dance around. Bishop here. If he comes here, I give him that. Then what's the headway? And if he comes here, give him that. If he tries to get in the game, shut the door. Like, there is no way White should lose this game. There is no way. So let's go back to this position. There is no way. But White found a way to lose this game. When I saw this game, I'm like, this super GMs, now I don't know. Rook h8, king f3. I mean, still even, but I'm not even going to put myself in the situation for this rook to have a chance of getting the game. So rook to h6, bishop d3, threatening nothing. I have no idea why that move is played. Now, bishop to c5. I like this move for black. Not that it still amounts to anything. Remember I mentioned this pawn being a weak pawn. Now, right now, this king has to defend this pawn, has to defend the square here. So now, pawn push is threatened. The idea is take, and I'm going to take. This is one thing about chess. The more you give your opponent opportunities for them to do something, the more they start feeling something might come out of it. If your opponent is not having any captures, he has nothing, at some point in time, the game will just fizzle out in the draw. But don't give them anything at all. Personally, in this position, I would have just moved my king back. Why? So if you do that, I'm going to do that. You cannot play this, I'm just going to win a pawn. I'm just going to win a pawn. And then I'm not even trying to win. I'm just going to hold the position. So after the move, bishop to c5, now, this is why I say know exactly what you're playing for. He plays rook to c1, attacking the bishop. Rook to c1, check, takes. Now there are chances. I'm not saying it's lost for white, but now, what do I mean? Now the rook has a file to play around with. This guy is just going to frustrate you. He has a file. Not that anything is coming out of it, but hey, we never can tell. But as long as the position is closed, there is no Magnus Carlsen that can do anything about this position. So the position kept going. Bishop d4, bishop to f2. Now, when we're talking about these pawns being weak, now the pawns on the light space can be taken care of by the bishop. But now the pawn on g3 can only be defended by the king and the rook, and can be attacked by the rook and the bishop. Anytime your king has to participate in defending anything, maybe a pawn, piece of square, that's a red flag. It's just a matter of time. And that's why it's very important that you don't want your king to be defending anything. So, okay, so bishop f2 is played, b4. Okay, now it's trying to create a passport. Things like this get you in trouble. You overwin super GM, you go easy, you have to build yourself to that point. Personally, in this position, I will find a way to start, maybe move my king to e2, and king to e2, bishop back here, so that my rook can come here to defend. Just defend your position. Don't say you have an idea. Just defend your position. So he plays b4, captures back, check, he attacks the bishop. Bishop goes, attacks the rook. Rook attacks pawn. Rook takes. Now there's problem. Now there's problem. Might not be a big problem, but there is problem. You don't want to be in a situation whereby you have to start really trying to solve puzzles against super GMs. You're going to get in trouble. Because imagine if these files were still closed. The less things for you to think about, less things for you to analyze. But if the file's open, you're gonna get in trouble. Especially after playing the game for such a long time. So king moves, bishop to c3. Tries to relocate the bishop to a strong square. Having all this, the pass pawn here, this king is gonna be in trouble. And I think that's exactly what happened in this game. Sorry, we don't need this. Thank you very much. So bishop c3, rook attacks the bishop. Bishop goes to d4. I'm trying to win a pawn. Rook check, king move. Rook check, king moves. Rook attacks the pawn. Pawn push protects the bishop, is protecting the pawn. King moves. Now, probably trying to just push the pawn. If you capture, it captures back. The king is protecting. He has two connected pawns. He has two connected pawns. With the file closed, these pawns don't exist. Oops. Excuse me. Sorry, I don't know. It's a mosquito or what. So these files don't exist. So rook check, king moves. Rook goes to a2, king goes back. Now, rook to f2, the threat is check, you take, I take check, you have to move. Like I said, now I have two connected pawns you have to deal with. So rook goes to a3. It's like, I'm just going to keep pushing my pawn. I don't know how that word is going to work out. He said, not today, I'm not going to let you do that. Every time you see a pass pawn, you want to stop the pawn from it. He said, the super GM knows better. He can't let you start pushing that pawn. So bishop to c4, check, moves, king defends the pawn. Now we have a pass pawn. This is the problem. We have a pass pawn. So that means we have chances. That's it. All a super GM one is chances. Chances. If you take those chances away, it's a different ball game. Rook moves. Rook to f4, trying to win the pawn. Check. King moves. Rook moves to h4. I think check is possible, forcing the king to move. Then there's a check, and then this pawn just rolls. So let's see what happened. Rook back. Now this is very important. Once it gets a pass pawn, it's a problem. Check, moves, check, moves. Rook attacks the bishop. Bishop moves. Rook attacks the bishop again. Bishop moves. Rook attacks the bishop again. Now the GM has a lot, even though that wasn't the best move. F3 was a much stronger move. But the mere fact to give the GM all these opportunities, it's going to make you suffer. Bishop goes to e2, rook check, king moves. Rook check again, king moves. Rook check. Now, that was the camel. That was the last straw that broke the camel's back. King h2 was just totally losing right here. And of course, the GM took his chance, wrapped up the position after that point. Now, another pawn bites the dust. You have all these three pawns to work with, to contend with. And of course, your bishop stops your pawn. There is just no way you're going to get anything out of this. Attacks the pawn, attacks the bishop. Bishop goes to f4, e3, rook to c7, attacks the pawn. Puts pressure on the pawn on e6. So you want to take the pawn, even if you win this pawn. What about this, guys? How are you going to stop that? Now the GM blunders, makes a bad move. I guess it's planning to give up this pawn, making sure it still has its two connected pawns. Of course, the rook is defending this, that's why. The super GM had a better move instead of that. Just king g5. When you're trying to promote your pawn, just your king's position is very important. King g5. And if rook takes, we can even move the king. No, you can't take because you're just going to take the bishop. So if bishop takes, then we can start advancing or even push the pawn. So that was a blunder by the GM. Not a blunder to lose, but he had a much better move. Bishop takes, king to e5, bishop protects the pawn. Pawn push. This game is just over right now because you have two connected pawns you have to deal with, coupled with a bishop and a rook, with a king on the side of the board. It doesn't look like it's going to end well. Check. Rook threatens checkmate because the king doesn't have any squares to go through. Still threat, not a checkmate because he has that square, g3. Now pawn push threatening to get a queen. And after this move, white resign. A very painful game, even for me, pained me for white. But it's a lesson. I'm sure when he goes back and check the game, he would have told himself, at this point in time, I can just, at this point in time, let me go back. Let me show us the position I'm talking about. Before the files got opened up, I can just sit on the position and there is nothing Anishkiri, Magnus Carlsen, Hikaru, all the Indian players put together. There is absolutely nothing they can do to this position. I'm going to go back to that position. And then after that, we are going to end this. So here, this is the position. So he plays King F3, Bishop to D3. He attacks the pawn, just bring the king right back. If he plays pawn push, don't let him do anything. Close the position. Make sure this rook doesn't have an open file. And if he pushes the other pawn, same thing, even worse. Because now with G4, we have all these guys looking there. Just forget about that. And there is no way this one is going to take this two. All right, we are going to stop this. These are the two games I plan to give us today. And really, the game is about when you have a position, even especially against a stronger player, just sit on the position. Don't try to tell yourself you have some ideas, unless the GM or whoever the stronger player is totally blunders. Okay, that's it for now. And it's actually about what time it is here. It's almost 3 a.m. But I just figured out to do this video today. And there's a tournament that starts tomorrow. Something about some league matches. I plan to cover those ones. But until then, see you soon. Let me know what you think about the videos and let me know how you think this channel can grow, what we can do to improve this. We're going to keep giving you some nice chess content. Thank you. God bless and bye for now.